There are almost 200 countries in the world, but one of them, well, it just stands apart. It's a nation so incredibly vast, it stretches across 11 different time zones, all the way from the shores of Europe to the edge of the Pacific Ocean. So let's dive into the story of Russia and figure out how it grew to be the biggest country on Earth. 6.6 million square miles. That's a number it's hard to wrap your head around, right? But think about this. For over 300 years, through Tsarist empires, revolutions, and even total collapse, Russia has remained the largest country on the planet. This incredible size isn't just some random stat. It's at the very core of its history and its identity. Okay, so let's try to put this into perspective. Think about Canada. We all know Canada is huge, right? It's the second biggest country on the planet. And yet, you could basically plop down almost two Canadas inside Russia's borders and still have room left over. That's the mind-boggling scale we're talking about here. So, the big question is, how? How on earth did one nation get so incredibly vast? Well, it's not like it happened overnight. The answer is this epic, thousand-year story, a saga full of Viking traders, scheming princes, Mongol warriors, and these absolutely relentless czars. All right, let's rewind. Our story really begins long before a unified Russia was even a thing. We have to go way, way back to a time when this land was just a giant patchwork of nomadic tribes and scattered city-states, where the very first seeds of a future empire were just starting to take root. So, you gotta understand, the foundation of what would become Russia, it wasn't laid by just one group of people. For ages, these vast plains were basically a highway for all sorts of nomadic tribes. But the real game changer? They showed up in the 9th century. We're talking about Vikings from Scandinavia. And they weren't just raiding, they were smart. They were traders, sailing down these huge rivers, setting up hubs that connected valuable furs from the north with the silks of Constantinople. And those little hubs, they would eventually grow into the first real power centers of the region. And these Norsemen, these Vikings, they were called the Rus. And yep, that's exactly where the name Russia comes from. They were really the ones who started to organize all the local Slavic tribes, and over time, they blended in, creating the first big states in the area, like the Kievan Rus and the super powerful trading republic of Novgorod. But you know how it goes, right? This early prosperity, it was incredibly fragile. There was this devastating force gathering out in the east, something that was about to just shatter their entire world. But here's the crazy part. Paradoxically, out of all that destruction, a brand new, super centralized power was about to rise up from the ashes. So in the 13th century, that threat from the east finally arrived. We're talking about the Mongols. Under Genghis Khan and his successors, they just swept across the Eurasian steppe. They were an absolutely unstoppable force. They conquered the Rus principalities and ended up ruling the whole region for 200 years as the Golden Horde. Okay, so not everyone was wiped out. While cities in the south were literally burning to the ground, this small, kinda overlooked northern duchy called Muscovy, what we now call Moscow, they played things very, very differently. They chose to submit instead of being annihilated, and they became the Mongols' official tribute collectors. It was a really shrewd move. They used this position of trust to quietly, piece by piece, absorb their weaker neighbors, building up their own strength right under the noses of their Mongol masters. And the guy who really brought this whole master plan home was Ivan III, who we now call Ivan the Great. As the Mongol Empire finally started to weaken in the 15th century, he went on the attack. He conquered the super-rich city of Novgorod and pulled all those northern lands together. And just like that, for the very first time, you have a unified Russian state, with Moscow at its heart. So now that they have this strong, centralized state, well, the ambition just goes through the roof. This next chapter, the Age of the Tsars, this is when Russia's borders just start to explode outwards. This is where the foundation for the massive country we know today really gets built. And the man who lit the fuse on all this was Ivan III's own grandson, Ivan IV, but you probably know him better as Ivan the Terrible. In 1547, he decided Grand Prince wasn't enough. He had himself crowned as the first Tsar, which is basically the Russian version of Caesar. And let me tell you, this wasn't just some fancy new title. It was a massive declaration of imperial ambition. So under these new czars, Russia's expansion just goes nuts, pushing out in three main directions all at the same time. You've got the east, across the Ural Mountains into Siberia, this vast, mysterious land that promised insane amounts of wealth and furs. Then you have the West, where the goal was to punch through to the Baltic Sea and get a direct trade route to Europe. And finally to the south, towards the Black Sea, where they'd have to take on the powerful Ottoman Empire. Now that push into Siberia, it happened at a speed that is just mind-blowing. The big prize here was the fur trade. They called it Siberia's soft gold, and the profits were enormous. So you had these tough-as-nails Cossack adventurers and trappers just pouring over the Ural Mountains. In less than 100 years, a single century, they had raced across the entire Asian continent, all the way to the Pacific Ocean, claiming a territory bigger than the entire United States for the Tsar. Incredible. Okay, so heading west, the goal was different. It wasn't just about grabbing land. It was about getting access. Peter the Great was completely obsessed with modernizing Russia and connecting it to the major powers in Europe. But to do that, he desperately needed a port on the Baltic Sea, a warm water port that wouldn't freeze over every winter. There was just one huge problem. The powerful Swedish Empire controlled the whole coastline. So what was Peter's solution? War. All right, so a bit later in the 18th century, we get another legendary ruler on the scene, Catherine the Great, and she decided to look south. Her big ambition was to push Russian power down into the Black Sea region, and that meant one thing, a direct showdown with the Ottoman Empire for control of that coastline. And wow, was she successful. I mean, it was stunning. Through a series of victorious wars with the Ottomans, she grabbed the super-strategic Crimean Peninsula. But she wasn't done. At the same time, she teamed up with Prussia and Austria to literally carve up the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth next door. From that, she absorbed huge chunks of land that are now modern Ukraine, Belarus, and Lithuania. By the time she was done, Russia wasn't just some big Eastern country anymore, it was a dominant, top-tier European superpower. But of course, an empire built like this, well, it couldn't last forever. The 20th century was about to bring some of the most dramatic, violent, and world-changing transformations in Russia's entire history, completely reshaping the empire and what it even meant to be Russian. The 20th century just turned everything upside down. In 1917, you have the revolution that topples the Tsar, which kicks off a horrifyingly brutal civil war. Out of that chaos, a totally new thing emerges, the Soviet Union. Now, it was founded on a completely different ideology, but its imperial ambitions were still there. After World War II, the USSR actually hit its absolute peak size, controlling this huge block of satellite states all across Eastern Europe. But this new kind of empire, one built on force, it just couldn't last. And then, in 1991, it all came crashing down. The Soviet Union dissolved. And in its place, 15 new, independent countries popped up on the map. The massive empire shrank a lot, as places like Ukraine, Kazakhstan, and the Baltic states all got their sovereignty back. And that's what created the borders of the modern Russian Federation that we know today. So, you see, Russia's enormous size isn't just some random quirk of geography. Not at all. It's the end result of a 1,000-year-long story. A cycle of smart political moves, unstoppable expansion, and then dramatic collapse. It's a history of incredible growth followed by sudden contraction, which of course leaves us with one final, huge question. After all that, what comes next for the biggest country on Earth?